So you've called on Dominic Cummings to go. Why do you think he needs to resign?
If he doesn't resign, we'll just keep burning through Boris's political capital at a rate that we just can ill afford in the midst of this crisis. It's very clear that Dominic travelled when everybody else understood Dominic's slogans to mean stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. And I think mums and dads who very much care about their children and who have been foregoing the childcare of their extended family will wonder why he's been allowed to do this. And I really just don't see, as we approach the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee on Wednesday, how this is going to go away unless Dominic goes.
I mean, the defence that's been mounted by allies of Dominic Cummings is that his wife was ill with coronavirus. He was worried that he was going to get ill, which he subsequently did, and he was trying to effectively protect the well-being of his child. Do you have any sympathy with that argument?
Well, of course, who couldn't have sympathy? But I also am aware that I represent tens of thousands of people, many of whom will have had children and wives and husbands who were ill with coronavirus and isolated at home for 7 days for the first person and 14 for the others without travelling to get better childcare. And I can hold a single father in mind immediately who stayed at home and didn't travel. And, you know, it's been extremely tough for those people. And I think yesterday, secretaries of state were out there with some quite thin lines trying to save Dominic, trying to change the newspapers for today, and it didn't work. And it isn't going to work because the media aren't going to let this go because of the way they've been sneered at, I'm afraid, because of the way Dominic conducts his politics. And I just see this rattling on now for day after day, wasting the public's time, consuming political capital and diverting from the real issues we need to deal with. No one is indispensable. Dominic should go, and we should have a chief of staff to the Prime Minister who doesn't end up in the newspapers in this way.
You mentioned there the way that Dominic Cummings conducts his politics. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I've said this for a long time. There's two things about Dominic, and I've said it to him before, and I've said it on the record before. The first is that he creates an awful lot of collateral damage. We've seen it before with things like the prorogation. He goes just that little bit too far and attacks institutions and people. And it all just gets too uncomfortable, and it has consequences. Doubling down on the bus, for example, during the campaign, the leaflet with Turkey. Things just get ugly around the edges, and it has collateral damage and consequences. I'm afraid it's important to win, but not at any cost. It matters how you win. And I'm afraid Dominic does things which I do not approve of. They're often effective, but they go too far. And the other issue, which we saw with the Vote Leave board in particular, and we've seen, I think, subsequently, is Dominic just really holds in contempt any effort to hold him accountable to others. And that's why I've always been opposed to him being in number 10. I've obviously had to do some difficult things in politics, but I've always made sure that I was accountable to more senior colleagues. And I've seen with my own eyes that Dominic won't do it. As far as I can tell, the only person in politics he respects is Michael Gove. And he fights against any attempt to control him or direct him and so on. And it's just not a suitable way for anyone to behave when they're in political life. We all have to be held to account.
At the same time, though, many of the Cabinet backed him yesterday. As far as we know, he still has the backing of the Prime Minister. Why do you think Dominic Cummings is so important, clearly, to Boris Johnson?
Well, first, if I may, on the Secretaries of State, members of the government, of course, they serve in the government in a sense at Dominic's pleasure. I think everybody's very clear that if you displease Dominic, you'd be leaving the government and briefed against as well. But I don't think that Dominic is indispensable to Boris. Dominic has always been very good at taking over any organisation that he's in. He's an extremely accomplished leader of his own team. I've seen that with my own eyes. He engenders a heartfelt and ferocious loyalty. He's full of ideas, often brilliant ones, but he is not always right. He is certainly not indispensable. No one is. After all, the graveyards are littered with people who were indispensable. He certainly, if we'd taken his strategic advice over the course of the last 2 years, we would, I think, have destroyed the Conservative Party, lost power to Jeremy Corbyn, and if the deal had gone through Parliament as he wanted, we would have bound ourselves into what Boris Johnson called vassalage. So I'm very grateful I didn't take his strategic advice in the course of the time since I resigned from government. But I'm afraid I just think this is the end of the road. I objected to Dominic going into number 10 on the day Boris became Prime Minister. My colleagues weren't with me. I think it's worked out badly as it was bound to do. I can understand why Boris got him in when it was a guerrilla warfare stage at the beginning. But now that we're into serious governing with a majority of 80, Dominic's tactics are out of place and he should go. And this moment has revealed that, really, he has ended up not abiding by the spirit, at least, of the slogans which he has enforced on the rest of the country.
Talk a bit about the members of the cabinet who've gone in to back Dominic Cummings, to effectively say that he did something that was understandable, that wasn't breaking the law, that was the right thing to do, just to reflect on some of the messaging that we've heard. Are you concerned that the message that people will now take from this is that the rules laid down for the government on lockdown are there to be interpreted rather than followed?
Well, this is a point I've made in the House of Commons. We can't be in a situation where there's uncertainty about what one is obliged to do under law on penalty of fines. After all, breaking the public health lockdown rules is a criminal offence, you get a, you go through and you get a criminal record if you don't pay the fines. If you pay the fines, it's not recordable. But this is the point. There's law is being involved here to punish people, and to be in a position now where there's extreme latitude in the interpretation of the rules, well, that makes them completely unenforceable for the police. I mean, how are the police supposed to enforce laws when they're now subject to such wide interpretation? It means that the lockdown in law, in practice, is virtually repealed. It isn't, I should say, for the public, it is not in fact repealed. But we're now in a nonsense position, a pantomime position, where it seems that if you wish to apply a wide common sense interpretation of the rules, you can do, at least if you work in number 10. It's ridiculous. It's got to stop, and Dominic should go.